Hi, and welcome to Lectionary Laxative, where we offer some brief insights into the lectionary texts on a given Sunday and try to keep you, preachers and lay people, from getting blocked up so that the spirit and inspiration can flow. I'm Bruce Seaman, a recently retired Presbyterian Church USA minister who's worked the lectionary texts for a long time through many cycles. You're going to figure out your sermon. But I'm going to share what I see and hopefully help you get some inspirational things moving. And the challenge for this coming Sunday is its title, Transfiguration Sunday. And why is that a challenge? Because no one knows what the hell the Transfiguration is. It's a theophany, obviously. But what is it trying to do? What is it meant to do? And what is it doing in the middle of the gospel? And if you're as perplexed as I am, you aren't alone. Bible scholars have no real clue what it is, any more than you or me. Some speculate. There are a bunch of scholars who believe it's a misplaced resurrection story. That's unlikely, but you can see how they're grasping for some clue about this event that's recorded in all three synoptic gospels. But the church and the lectionary committee figure this is important even though we don't know exactly what it is. So here we are. And it's Valentine's Day this Sunday, so let me congratulate in advance Dale and Louise on another anniversary since I officiated their wedding in church during the worship service on Valentine's Day, back when the two of them were mere children in their 80s. Now they're both in their 90s, still going strong. And yes, it is Valentine's Day. It is a Hallmark holiday. So if you want to preach some Valentine's message, you're not going to get any help from me here. You're on your own. See you next time. The world provided Valentine's Day. Whatever. God provided the Sabbath for raising up the people of God. So you choose which to follow. Before we look at the Transfiguration story in Mark 9, let's start with 2 Kings 2 and the ascent of the prophet Elijah. The reader is immediately tipped off about what is coming. It starts right off, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. So, no surprises here for the reader. The text describes the dedication of Elijah's successor, Elisha, to stay with his master, who keeps telling Elisha to stay behind, but he won't. Their destination keeps changing as Elijah says to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." "Stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho." "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." Now, if I'm Elijah, I'm asking, "Lord, make up your mind." But I'm not Elijah, and that's why. Because Elijah has learned to do what he's told and to have faith in God. I still insist on asking stupid questions like, "God, what are you doing?" And then we have this transparent reenactment of the crossing of the Jordan, like Joshua's post-Exodus crossing into the Promised Land, which itself is a mini echo of Moses parting the Red Sea in the Exodus flight from Egypt. So in other words, if you part the waters, you're a big deal. The Jordan River, however, is not a big deal, as you can see in this picture of the Jordan River. So, okay, it's really about the story value, not the reality. Elijah asks his protege for any last request, because everybody knows what's coming. Elisha says, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Now, what does that mean? Well, No one really knows. Whatever it means, it's a tough one for Elijah too. But, well, okay, so Elijah makes the granting of this difficult, obscure request contingent on the disciples seeing Elijah get taken up. And why is this important? We don't know. But that's what's required for Elisha's wish to be fulfilled. And then finally it happens, a chariot of fire with horses of fire separates Elijah from Elisha. God, in effect, ends the disciples' role as learner as his master is taken up in a whirlwind, kind of like the backdraft from the chariot and the horses of fire. Despite pictures like this, the text does not indicate that Elijah caught a ride on the chariot of fire. He would have been burned. Ouch. Turned to ashes. Rather, he is taken up in the whirlwind, not riding in a chariot of fire like he had called for a divine Uber. So we have a story that involves patience and obedience, allowing time for the will of God to be fulfilled. And we see that inseparable bond of master and disciple, a faithful relationship that only God's fiery intervention can breach. God moves each one on to the next step of their faithful journey. So, we already have plenty of themes just from this text. Let's tackle the transfiguration story in Mark 9 next. We should check the context within Mark's gospel, because preceding the transfiguration are the questions about who Jesus is, with Peter saying, Jesus is the Messiah. Now in Matthew, Peter gets a gold star for this answer, but in neither Mark nor Luke is there any comment afterward, either affirmative or negative. It's just there. The Messiah is not necessarily the right answer. And it's interesting that exchange about identity is then followed by a group of Son of Man references. And the inference that could easily be drawn from the context in both Mark and Luke is that the Son of Man would have been the correct answer about who Jesus is. And look at the context, even out here in chapter 9 of Mark's Gospel, it only has 16 chapters, is the question of who Jesus is exactly. All right, well, that brings us to the mountaintop, where you can bet there's going to be a good theophany, because mountaintops are God action hotspots. Just ask Moses. And there, Jesus is transfigured. And as I've said, we don't get it. We don't know what this is. I mean, Jesus' clothes become dazzlingly white, even, shall we say, heavenly white, or divinely white. In any case, it is out of this world white. Why? What does it mean? We really don't know. Well, Moses and Elijah show up for this party on the mountaintop, the great lawgiver and the great prophet. But notice how they have no dazzle. They do nothing. They say nothing that we can hear. The simple idea is that all three belong together. And Jesus, as Son of Man, is the one sent by God to advance God's kingdom to fulfillment in the world. By the way, the Son of Man is drawn from the vision that we find in Daniel 7. I'll have an episode coming up in Gospel Insights about what the Son of Man is all about. This mountaintop show has an audience. The three leaders among the disciples, Peter and James and John, the brothers Zebedee. And Peter talks wacky about constructing booths as if it were the Feast of Tabernacles. No scholar can make any sense of that either. I guess the editorial remark that we find in verse 6 of Peter's not knowing what to say or do, and the basic fear of the disciples is just fine as an explanation. Because the disciples have no idea what's going on, like us, and no idea what to do, and no idea what's coming next. But they are alert, because now the voice of God has something to say. This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him! Exclamation point. The message for the disciples in the audience is, shut up. Yes, God means you, in particular, Peter, and listen to what Jesus has to say, because Jesus is the real deal. So stop the questioning, stop the doubting, stop the stupid, just listen, get to work. So with the Elijah-Elisha succession narrative, we have connections here to the bond of discipleship, the demand to pay attention to what God is doing. Connecting nicely as a follow-up if you pursued the theme of distractions last week, and to realize that you may not know exactly what is going on, together with having the patience and presence to allow God's will to work out over time. So you can do stuff with these items, and that will set the table nicely for Lent. All right, let's look at the Psalm and Epistle selections. Psalm 50, 1 through 6, really begins with an opening argument in a trial. God is judge of heaven and earth, and all who dwell within God's creation. The psalm warns us that God is not silent, bears a devouring fire, and storms swirl all around God. So wake up, people. Our God comes, as the text says. You better straighten up. All of heaven and earth are summoned. Not invited, not asked, but commanded to show up. Subpoenaed, if you will, because God has got the judging robes on. God is particularly concerned with God's people, the ones who claim to be worshiping God, just like the folks in the pews and the preachers in the pulpits. Heads up, people. God is a God of justice, and God is demanding justice from you. Now, if you read the rest of the psalm, God sees what's going on with God's worshiping people, but they're also faithless and sinful. And just as God sees what is going on when the disciples can't wrap their heads around Jesus and his mission, God is going to straighten things out and make everything really clear, maybe painfully clear. In the 2 Corinthians 4 text, Paul talks about the God of this age, lowercase g, the God of this world and the sinful, disobedient powers within the world. This God and these powers would prevent the gospel from being heard and understood. This God and its powers are threatened by the gospel, by its light that turns back the world's darkness, violating the powers and this God's control and authority. The light of God is readily perceived by those who bear a heart and spirit of faith, and that light leads the faithful away from the world and into the kingdom, into its blessings and its new life. Again, it connects well with paying attention to what God is doing, remaining dedicated to the path that God has revealed, and knowing that God brings light with justice, peace, and new life for the faithful. And as the psalmist said, it can also bring a heaping pile of what you don't want for those who refuse, reject, ignore, or otherwise remain blind to what God's will and purpose is. Well, that's it for this week. There are several directions you can go with these texts. They can provide a nice setup for the coming Lenten season. I hope you will like the Gospel Insights page on Facebook, follow at Gospel Insights on Twitter, and subscribe to Gospel Insights on YouTube. Lectionary Laxative should be up and posted on Tuesdays so that you're ready for the coming Sunday. Well, the sermon is now in your hands. I hope this was helpful. Now, go kick some ass for Jesus.